in South Africa, we all had to do 2 years of military training, or 2 years of national service, they called it. So there I was, did my basic training, and then I got shipped off around the country in South Africa, and a lot of it was doing guard duty. And one day something happened that changed my whole life and is the reason I'm standing here today, although I did not know it at the time. I happened to be in a military hospital where some children were injured by some landmine explosions. I was going to visit a friend, happened to walk through the children's ward by accident. There were a whole bunch of kids on beds, and sitting on the edge of one of the beds was a little boy, probably 5 years old, and his legs had been very, very badly injured. And as I walked by, this little boy just put up his arms, and he said to me in Afrikaans, and I'm not quite sure why he spoke Afrikaans, but he said to me, "Hou my vas asseblief," which means, "Please, can you hold me?" He was probably 5, and I looked around. I didn't quite know what to do, and I'm looking to see if there are any doctors or nurses in the room or something to help this little guy, because there were just no grown-ups in the room at the time. So I looked down at him again, and he reached even higher, and he said in this little sweet voice, Can you please hold me?" And all of a sudden I knew what to do. I put down my rifle, and I took off my backpack, and I picked up this little boy, and I can tell you, I have never been held so tightly in my life. He wouldn't let go. And that little boy buried his little face right here in my neck, and he started to cry. Oh my goodness, he cried so hard. And you know, that little boy's tears ran down my cheek and my neck and into my shirt and touched my heart. And that's where I knew what I was going to do for the rest of my life, inside. I didn't realize it at that time. And I sometimes still hear that little boy's voice, especially when I get too big for my own boots, or I think I'm so important that I don't have to listen to what is being told to me, and I hear that little voice. I became an advertising person after I finished the army. I directed TV commercials and came to America. I was going to come to this country and follow my dreams, in which I did. Very, very lucky for me, met Amiel. We got married, and bless her heart, I would come to her every day and tell her I had this brilliant idea. Actually, I still do. I've got this great idea. I've got this, you won't believe this idea. And one of those ideas all those years ago was I'd written a book called The Keeper of the Dreams. A very simple story about a little girl starts losing her dreams. Her grandpa, who lives in an old folks' home, tells her she needs to visit the Keeper of the Dreams to get the dreams back. He explains how. In a dream, she visits the Keeper of the Dreams, who's sick, and the boogeyman has taken over. And so the story is how she wins her dreams back, which was just perfect. So I couldn't get the book published. Couldn't get it published anywhere. Sent off all these letters, got rejection after rejection. In fact, one day I collected, I think, over 400 rejections for my books. And she said, "Why are you keeping these things? They're negative. Throw them away." And I did. I threw them away. But I decided I was going to give this book to charity. I was going to give it to a charity. They could publish it and take the proceeds of the book. So I went around to all the charities in Austin. Nobody was interested. They're like, "This is a bit weird. What, he just wants to get his book published." But that kind of was how I was trying to get it published. So it was true. Then I came across an organization called the Candlelighters Childhood Cancer Foundation. And I presented the book to them, and Debbie Sharp, who is a friend of ours to this day, said, "Yes, we'll take the book, we'll publish it." And so they published the book, and we made a nice sum of money for the Candlelighters. And then one day she says to me, "We need to do a book signing at the hospital for the kids that you wrote this book for." And I'd never met a kid with cancer before. I'm like, no, I can't go to the hospital and see a sick child. I don't think I can do it. She says, "Well, yes, you are going to have to do it because you wrote the book for those kids." So I had to do it. I was really nervous. I didn't want to do it, and I did it. Went to the hospital. She takes me into this playroom. There are about 16 kids, all with little IV poles standing there, aged probably from 14 till 3 or 2, bald from the chemotherapy. And they're all looking at me when I walk in. My stomach is turning. I'm nervous. So I did what I do best. I shared the story. I sat down, told the kids how I wrote it, and then I read it. And little girl, she couldn't have been more than 6 years old, puts her hands up and she said, "Excuse me, sir, can you read it again?" I'm like, "Okay, sure." I read it 7 times that day, because you know how kids like to hear things over and over. And what was really wonderful was that afterwards we got talking, we got drawing, and I was getting ready to leave, and a little boy, his name was Alex Dunn, puts up his hand and he says to me, "Excuse me, sir." I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you coming back tomorrow?" And I said, "Yeah." And I've been going back to hospitals and working with kids for almost 30 years now, since Alex put up his hand and said, "Are you coming back?" And what I do at the hospital, when I do go, and unfortunately I've been doing a lot of traveling now, but try to get to hospitals when I go to different cities, what I do with the kids is help them to express what they're feeling through creativity. And one day I was sitting in the hospital with a little boy. His name was Victor. Victor was a wild man. He was, I think, 13. And he says to me one day, we're sitting there, he says, "What do you think's going to happen when I die?" And I'm about to answer him. His mother jumps off the chair. She runs over to the bed. She said, "You are not going to die. We have spent $375,000 to keep you alive. You will not die." He goes, "Okay, Mom, if you say so." His mother left the room. And I said to him, "Hey, listen, you know, we're all going to die sometime. I'm going to die. You're going to die." He said, "I know." I said, "So what do you mean?" He says, "So what do you think happens? What do you think is going to happen when I die?" I said, "You know, I'm hoping, but I believe that there's some place we will go." He goes, "Oh, yeah. I believe that there's a heaven." I'm like, "Okay, cool." He said, "But you know what? Do you think when you get there, they'll give you a map?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, you know, how do you know where to go? It's probably a really big place." Well, a very valid question. I said, "You know what? I'll tell you what. Don't worry. When you get up there, ask for my grandfather. His name is Ted." Now, my grandfather was a great guy. He said, "You go look for him. He'll get you checked in. He'll get you a good room. He is a great guy." He says, "How am I going to find him?" "You know, 1,000 people died in the war." I said, "Victor, millions of people died." He goes, "That's worse." I said, hang on. I drew a picture of my grandpa, tore it out of my journal, gave it to him. He put it on the little bulletin board next to his bed where the get well cards are and stuff is. He goes, "He looks like he's a nice man." I said, "He is. And if my grandpa's around, definitely he would have taken care of this dude." So for about 6 months, when I went to go and visit him, I would tease him, which was my job as a doctor of mischief. And he would say, "I'm going to tell your grandpa when I see him that you're teasing me." And I said, "Don't. He is a spirit. He could be a ghost. So don't do that. He could come and haunt me." Of course, he thought that was really funny. Unfortunately, Victor didn't make it. He battled along for 6 months, and he passed away. And his parents asked me if I would deliver the eulogy at the church. I hadn't spent much time in churches in my life, and certainly had never done a eulogy. So I decided I was going to do a stand-up comedy routine to celebrate his life instead of mourning his death. And that's exactly what I was planning to do. And I walked into the church, and it was an open casket ceremony. Now, where I come from, in my background, there is no viewing. There's no open casket. A person is buried very soon after they die. So I decided I wasn't going to look in the coffin at the church, because the thing was open as you walked in there. And I was like, I'm not going to look in there. So I skirt past the coffin. They wheel the coffin in next to the pulpit, and the priest gets up. He delivers a eulogy, and he says, "Well, I'd like to call Trevor Romain to come up and do the memorial." And so I go up there, not looking into the coffin, and start talking about Victor and what a wild child he was. He one time took his urine sample container, poured apple juice into it. The nurse comes, asks for his sample. He picks it up, and he says, "Wow, it's all cloudy." She's looking at it, he's looking at it. He pops open the lid, and he says, "Well, I better pass it through again." And he drinks it. And the nurse is like, "You're drinking pee." He goes, "No, I'm not." She said, "You're drinking your own pee. Are you mad?" He goes, "No, I didn't. I saw you." He says, "It's apple juice, it's apple juice." She was so angry. She wanted to slap that kid upside the head. She was so mad. So I'm telling this at the congregation. There were a lot of people. They're all laughing. And I turned and I said, "You know, this little guy, he really made me look at life differently." And I turned and I looked, and I'm so glad I did. He looked peaceful. He looked at ease. He was lying there. He had a black tuxedo with a red bow tie. His head was bald from the chemotherapy. In his coffin were all his toys from when he was a kid. His blankie from when he was a little guy. Flowers. His hands were on his chest. And you know, as I looked at him, I noticed that he was holding that picture of my grandfather. And I realized then that so often we tell kids what we think they need to hear instead of listening to what they're asking for. And all that boy needed was somebody just to hear what he was struggling with instead of discounting it and leaving him feel alone with his worries about his future. And it really opened my eyes so much. That was a way that I felt was a real good connection. He was great.